Notification your live stream imekuja, si ndio?
Yes.
Just give me a minute, I'm telling you. It's glitching on my side. Just Zoom today is on Sabbath also. We need an editor for this. But is it showing that we are live on Facebook on your side?
Yes.
Let me check. Okay, great.
Is it? Because mine is still loading something, so I just need to. Oh, it is.
It is. It's live. It's being recorded. It's live.
Okay, then let's go on. Welcome the people on this side of the oceans and the people back home. Karibu sana. It's cold here, but we hear you all. Nairobians took all the heat. Just take it with you. Stay with it. We don't want all the heat. We just want some of the heat. But karibu sana. Today our conversation is on emotional labor. And as usual, our hotuba person, speech person, will start. So, Sarah, you're up.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and glad to be here. Whenever I'm trying to explain to people what emotions are, I often resort to using the analogy of a motor vehicle dashboard. And it's your window. It's your window into what's happening in the engine. Although the engine, for most modern vehicles, they have what we call sealed engines. And so whatever is happening really in there is invisible. It is only made kind of visible by what you see on your dashboard. And the more cars have become modern, the dashboards of vehicles look like cockpits. There's so many signs and have been the subject of very many funny memes. So a few years ago, we did something loosely translated in Swahili. It's called Rusha Roho. If we did a direct translation, it makes no sense because it will mean through your heart. But it was basically a road trip that my siblings and I did to our rural homes in Africa. You normally have more than one rural home, depending with your marital status and all that. I was tasked with getting the vehicle. I don't drive because of visual problems, but I kind of knew many guys. So I was tasked with getting us a vehicle, which I did. I did all the due diligence I could, but the vendor, being the vendor, brought us a vehicle A very late, and B, we don't know if it is the fuel he put or there was something wrong with the car. The ride was horrible. We even gave the car a name. We called it McGregor, like in a bid to try and get it going. And I still remember to this day, my sister Posa was the one driving. A, she hates driving in the night. And the way things turned out is we needed to drive in the night. And B, for goodness sake, there was rain. There's raining cats and dogs, and then there's raining members of the cat family and the dog family. And this one was the latter. So everything was terrible. Everything was really terrible. And I just still up to today, we still keep remembering there was a certain light on the dashboard that came. We called, we did what we could. It just kept telling us there's something wrong with the engine. We couldn't tell what it was, okay? The secret toils of the engine of the vehicle frustrated us throughout the night and basically throughout that entire travel. But the unfortunate thing is we couldn't tell what was wrong with that engine. And so we did all we could. We tried burning fuel. The car went like a coal engine, like all smoke and no movement and no progress. That is story number one. Story number two is from a popular painting. Again, in modern times, we have made a bunch of memes out of it. And it's the painting of what is famously called the Last Supper. and it's the Da Vinci painting where you see Jesus in the middle and he's surrounded. It's usually down on a flat space, so you see the 12 disciples, and depending with your interpretation, they look like either they're in engagement or they look like they're in argument, during the day. And it's made me go and read the story behind the actual story in the Bible behind that. And in light of today's discussion about emotional labor, like that, no wonder when I looked at how Jesus looks like in that particular painting, this was a man of immense emotional labor. He's opening just a few days before that particular Passover. He's with fully grown men, and they are busy, fully grown Jewish men who are seeing the Passover is coming. So it was from childhood as a Jewish man, you're trained like, hey, when the Passover is coming, there are certain things you need to have in place. And this fully grown Jewish man turned to Jesus and asking him like, hey, what's the plan? Jesus has been traveling along with them. They've basically been all along with them. And so they're basically the full adults asked him like, hey, what's the plan? And so seems like Jesus had a few connections. So he told them, go to this place, go prepare, tell them the master needs a place. And so it's prepared. One would imagine when such an event, you've been given the courtesy of somebody pre-thinking and having those things in place, that you'd be in best behavior. But no, when you read the details of the first Passover, the thing that triggers that painting, it was anything but nice. This is literally Jesus' opening words when he's sitting down. He says, with desire, I have desired to eat with you this particular meal, and I will not eat it again until I eat it in the New Jerusalem, So this is somebody who, the meal in front, almost like my story with the car, the meal in front was like a dashboard light about something more deeper within. And he had made an attempt to verbalize how important it was to him. But when you now begin unpacking the behavior, just a quick synopsis is those, there were at least 12 disciples with him. One of them had already conspired to betray him, and in all likelihood had the 30 pieces of silver with him. And when he was even called out, he still had the courtesy, the audacity to turn to Jesus and still ask him, is it going to still be me? And Jesus doesn't call him out, doesn't, blow his cover. So you can imagine how much emotion he's bottling. So much so that by the time of his exit, the other 11 imagine he's going to buy something. He's like well covered like that. And it's Jesus taking the heat. Two brothers, John and James, are all busy trying to compete who is going to be the greatest. And in the midst of everything that is happening, there's an argument during that feast, like who's going to be the greatest. One other is called Peter. Peter is, Jesus even looks at him straight up and tells him, hey, you're not even converted and you'll deny me 3 times today. Another one, probably called Simon the Zealot, has got 2 swords during this particular feast. So you can imagine this feast is so important to Jesus. He's gone through the trouble of making it organized and everything in place. But then the behavior of every person there in the feast is nothing close to meeting his emotional needs. It's actually exacerbating it. Not once, when you just look at the history of how that painting was done, not once during that feast, Jesus had to stop feasting to do either to tell guys like, hey, let's stop quarreling about who's going to be the greatest. He had to stop the feasting to confront Judas or to address Peter or John and there's a very interesting line when you read the story as recorded by Luke, when eventually they produce like 2 swords, you almost get that emotional picture, like when you come home, and like those days, mom would come home and she was tired and everything is everywhere. The expression we say, the day the cake has fallen, the clothes are unfolded, the chairs are upside down. And then out of that, a kid produces something like, Mom, I've just broken the flask. Most of African mothers will just say, it's enough. And when you read the story of Jesus on that day, when these guys produce 2 swords, he just says, you know what, guys, it's enough. It's enough. Let's go to the garden. Like he's emotionally, he's laboring so much, and the people around are not either interpreting or supporting. And sure, shortly enough, when they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, the bottled in emotion begins gaining expression externally, albeit this time in the form of sweaty blood drops. And yeah, like the cherry on the cake, the guys whom he turned to for emotional support were asleep, not once, not twice. They were told like, hey, dude, I need help, but like they were out. And in Christian tradition, we often say Christ had already begun the process of dying. And way before a single cross was a single nail was in his hand or a single lashing was upon his back. And the funny thing is, it was emotional labor that he was carrying that was literally at a very physiological level killing him. So today I'm just thinking, how many McGregor cars are we driving around that are making the trip long, annoying, wasteful? By the way, at the end of that trip, you should have seen my sister Swan, who was driving. She was to call her irritable would be, to praise her. She was at the edge of everything. And that is because we had to keep guessing what the lights on the dashboard were not able to gain the most. So I'm just imagining what McGregor vehicles are we pushing along, or still, which disciples have we surrounded ourselves with who not only are making us labor emotionally, but are also not there to support adequately when we need them. It's really time that, we talk about this kind of stuff, because fine, for the McGregor vehicle, we came back. Today we can laugh beyond the fact, but really, anything could have happened, and my mother's children were in that car. Anything could have happened to that vehicle, and the story would have been very different. In the case of Jesus, something did happen, and the story, yes, went very different. There was a death, there was everything else that happened associated with it. But I'm imagining how many households have one spouse sacrificing or crucifying themselves under the burden of emotional labor. Imagining how many homes, how many countries are toying and driving at suboptimal speed because emotional labor is towing them down. But the worst thing of both stories is this: the emotional labor was invisible. We didn't know what was happening in the engine. All we saw were dashboard lights. We were completely blindsided to what was truly happening in the engine level. The disciples were not fully discerning of what was happening in the heart of hearts of Jesus. They were fixated on the external activities, but were completely blindsided to the emotional. And in both cases, it was what was invisible that was really pulling down the entire individual. So it's time we had this honest conversation, a conversation about emotional labor. Back to you in studio.
Thank you. And you didn't add that Dad was calling incessantly, "Where are you?" Because it was my grandmother was dying. And so it was the final send-off. In Luyaland is a final bride price that my father had to take before the last parent dies. So it was that ceremony, and all of us were being waited for. And he kept on calling incessantly. I reached there. I think I blacked out. I was given food. I slept because we had to drive back the same night. That is PTSD, that car. I hope it's out of the lot completely. Anyway, let's go on. So let's describe what emotional labor, and we will start with you, Joanne, for obvious reasons, because catching feelings, you're going away, but let's go on. What's a description of emotional labor?
Good morning, good evening, good day, depending on where you are. My name is Joanne Mwangi. I'm going to first introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am a coach, a life coach that concentrates on inner child wounding and boundaries, emotional intelligence, all that. I'm located in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. It looks warm, but I'm sure it's cold today. Anyway, what is emotional labor? I'm going to give the layman's definition of it, so that we're not using terminology that's not easy to understand. It is basically work that somebody has to do that goes unrecognized or unpaid. And I'll give an example. I'll give an example that maybe will resonate with most people. Young family, mom, dad, and very young children, right? The parents, the husband and the wife want to go on a date, and somebody has to take care of the children. And in this context, we don't have house help or anybody taking care of the children in the home. So the two parents have to figure out who is going to watch the kids, what time is the babysitter coming, all that. Typically, the labor falls on the wife to figure out who is going to take care of the children. Like the planning aspects of this date go on the wife. The husband may make a reservation somewhere, we're going to this restaurant, whatever, but the wife has to plan, and the thought process of making that night go smoothly is what we call the emotional labor, because she's having to think, what babysitter is right? Is the babysitter old enough? Is she going to be able to take care of all the kids if there are multiples? If it's an infant, is this person going to be able to take care of the infant? How late can they stay? What do we need to get food for this person? What happens if this person doesn't show up? Who else can come in and fill in? All that process of making stuff happen without really talking through it with somebody. That is what the emotional labor is. On the work side, corporate, anywhere, we think of people who, like your person who works in the supermarket or the grocery store here, we call it grocery store in the US. Somebody who works in the grocery store, flight attendants, customer service reps, when you call in to Safaricom because your phone is not working right. That person on the other end, regardless of whether they're having the worst day of their life, there is this saying that says the customer is always right. You have to appease the customer. You have to be in a good mood. Smile. Your voice needs to have a smile in it, right? Even if you don't want to smile, even if you're hurting, even if you're in pain, you have to smile. The person on the other end has to feel they have to feel your emotions in your voice. So that is the labor of suppressing what you're truly feeling to appease everybody around you. That is what I would call emotional labor in layman's term. Thanks, Posa.
Karibu. Tony, let's go to you. What's the difference between emotional labor, emotional work, and the emotional load? Or if you can speak and you're mute, yes. Just go ahead. Introduce yourself to us, the same spiel.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. My name is Tony. I am a transitions coach based in Nairobi. I run an organization called The Influential, where we help people make transitions smoothly and successfully. So thank you, Posa, for that question. So I will go back to what we've just been told. So this term, of course, came from sociology, and it was coined by a sociologist called Ali Hochschild in 1983. But it's gone through some iterations now, emotional labor, to cover what she told us. These are you having to regulate your feelings, having to pretend sometimes that you are not feeling the way you are feeling to appease another person's feelings. So in other words, emotional labor is such work, it's considered as difficult as manual labor, just like using your physical body. The way you would get tired, it's considered work in that respect. So an emotional load would be something that I am carrying. Maybe I am going through something that perhaps I know of a secret that would devastate my parents if I told them. And the emotional load that I carry is I'm having to hide it. That's something from them, because if I told them, it would destroy them. So that would constitute an emotional load. So I'm dealing with an issue that if I disclose would, I think would destroy somebody I love. So I hide it within me. I didn't get the third one, but the emotional labor is different from that, in that you're dealing with two emotions, and especially in places like work or the family, where you're trying to hide your true emotions and showing us a different emotion because you're trying to sort of appease us, or like we were told that the customer is always right at work. So you're having to subjugate your emotions, so to speak, and smile when inside you're dealing with loss, you're dealing with stress, you're dealing with anxiety. You're supposed to not show those because they are not acceptable. I think there's a third one you had said that I did not get.
Emotional work.
Emotional work. Emotional work is work that necessitates you using your emotions. So I'm trying to get an example of work that necessitates you to use your emotions, like counseling, for instance. If you're a counselor, you have to listen to something difficult, and you have to also try and empathize with the person who is telling you. So you use your emotions as well to understand them. So that does not constitute emotional labor. Emotional labor, the difference is that you are dealing with two different sets of emotions, and you are communicating one and hiding the other. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, do you have a different definition? You can introduce yourself to us and just add on to what Joanne and Tony said. Do you have a different definition? I know this is a weird topic, but let's just keep going. When it's too hard, just raise your hand and say, Paso Mezidi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Ogugu, and I am a health coach with a background in nutrition, foods, nutrition, and dietetics, which is interesting based off of some of the questions I've been getting about, like, how does this tie into what you're discussing? So my definitions are usually biased depending on what we are focusing on, because my health coaching practice is built off of the fact that very many people came to me thinking they needed to eat more fruits and vegetables, but wound up realizing that they were dealing with sleep issues, or they were not taking enough water, or they were struggling with their mental health. And so I figured, let me cover all those things, then we can finally land on the nutrition bit. And so with regard to emotional labor, I honestly don't think I could add anything else other than the perspective of how that affects how we behave around food and drinking. So many thoughts, but let me narrow them down. With regard to emotional labor, I'd like to pick on what Joanne has said about it being unrecognized and unpaid. I have a bit of a bias because I mostly work with women, so there's going to be that leaning. So very many of my female clients who are in romantic relationships will talk about the struggles they have, and quite literally how Joanne has explained it is when they have to carry the decision making and the actual action. So that is to say, they suffer from what I call decision fatigue. So you wake up in the morning, and for the average man, when I ask him how his day goes, he says, I wake up, I have some breakfast, you know, I have to rush to work, I get ABCD done. Very short answers, very clear. And when I try and dig deep thinking, he's just communicating like a man, he needs to give me more information, I realize sometimes there's nothing to overthink because there's nothing to really think about beyond he wakes up and breakfast is there. Not that it just falls from the sky, but because someone else woke up and came up with a plan for what should be eaten for the rest of the week. When I ask the women though, paint a picture for me about how your day goes from morning to evening. My God, the detail. So I wake up at a particular time and they know what time. And this is why the kids have to be ready by this time and blah, blah, blah. By the time they're coming to me, you usually don't have a menu, or they have a menu that will help guide how they eat in the course of the week. But they're like, and the hardest part is thinking, so what are we supposed to have for breakfast? So they'll either delegate that to the house manager, or they'll handle it by looking for the quickest way to get these kids fed without fussing and out of the door. If they go to school with a sugar high, that's not her headache to deal with. Not because she's a bad mother, but because she's so exhausted anyway. By the time the day has started, she's already tired. Then there's all the work that goes into showing up at an office, etc. But then before she goes to work, there's also managing the house manager, leaving instructions about when the kids come, this is what they should do first. Uniform needs to be washed, you know, just the typical running of the home. And then while at work, depending on the age of the children and just life, what the universe decides to throw you that day, you know, could there be a fever, a cold, a disciplinary issue? Usually it's the mother who is called. Is there a children's party? Is there a function? Is there a PTA meeting? Is there a little league? Is there whichever corner of the world? Usually I'll hear the women talk about this stuff. Now, Saya talks a bit about memes, and I remember I live online. And so I've seen these interviews where parents are asked random questions about their children, very personal questions. What's your child's favorite color? How old are they? Who is their best friend? What are their hobbies? Moms don't usually think about it. Moms and usually female caregivers are like, oh no, this is what they like, this is what they do, this is what they're embarrassed about. If I told you this, they'd be upset, so I'm not going to share it. Literally, house managers will be questioned and they'll be able to answer those things because of how much time they spend with kids. And then, unfortunately, for the videos I have watched, and it's just the feminism kicking in, the men have sometimes guessed the ages of their children wrong. They don't know the names of their best friends. They are surprised that there's a camp they went to. So you're wondering, like, he didn't notice the children were missing for 3 days and stuff like that. So there's that amount of labor. How does this affect people? At the end of the day, when this woman gets home, she is frustrated, she's tired, she's angry, she's probably hungry. And she again will very often delegate the care of the children to someone else if she can afford to. If she can't afford to, that's a different ball game. She also has to take care of the cooking and the cleaning and the whatnot. And we have these internal jokes about how a man will sometimes come home and say he's had a long day, put his feet up, and she'll feel resentful. Depending on her culture, her religious background, etc., will she be able to communicate to him, I am frustrated when you come home, and I have also come home and you put your feet up? Because has she been taught that a good woman does not question and that submission means never asking? And Proverbs 31 woman never complained about how much work she had to do because she rose early and stuff like that. So there are so many factors that come into play. And that also affects, eventually the eating, the drinking. So there's a lot of emotional eating because you'll hear that women are emotional, like, yeah, but also women are generally exhausted because caregiving and nurturing is expected of us by society. If anything, if you're on the other end of the spectrum, you're almost punished. How dare you be child-free and you're working? Kwani, what is your money for? You know, and we hear such thoughts. Or if mothers complain about how difficult motherhood is, sometimes even other mothers will tell them that children are a blessing, etc. So I went on this whole tirade to explain how all this comes into play when I am seated across a room with someone who's come in to talk about their health and wellness, and so that we get a picture of where they're coming from when they're complaining about not being able to manage the blood sugars, or their blood pressure, or their weight, or their autoimmune diseases, or their gut issues, because stress affects all these things. And when you're stressed, sometimes you go into hyper focus, like, I just need to get the basics done, get the bills paid on time, get the kids out of the house, get dinner done. I don't care if the children are eating rice fried with potatoes, that's what they'll eat. So when this child winds up in the clinic malnourished, it's not necessarily because they have a bad mother who didn't go to school. I have seen this happen with mothers who went to university. Some of them have medical backgrounds. It's because she has so many things happening. She just got her eyes off track a little bit. And because she missed this for a few weeks, other issues came up. But it goes on and on. So I think I'll stop there.
Kweli. So because we need to pile on the men a bit, so let me go back to Joanne. I was watching a crossover, the Kenyan influencers have crossover videos. So this crossover was between Carol Mutoko and Kit Kiaria. Kit, right? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Sharon. And they were talking about the number of wives they have, not actual Joanne, excuse me, but people they delegate to. And I think Carol said she has 4, like people she outsources her labor to, and this she said 4, and Kit I think said 2 or 3. I can't remember how many. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, and we always say, even my friends and I said, oh my God, I need a wife. We never ever say we need an extra husband. Never. Tony, I have never had. So let me start with Joanne. Is this a female problem only, or are we just being okay? So what's a I know if it's hard, tell me, what's a crossover between feminism, patriarchy, culture, izozote? Is it a female problem?
So emotional labor is mainly, in terms of family, a female issue. Like the emotional labor is carried by the woman. However, even in the workplace, it is also being carried mostly by men. I work in an environment where, yes, we have men, I'm in IT, but human resources, which is predominantly women, but there's men running the show, if I may say that. And in the workplace, the way it shows up is, say we are planning an event. Like right now, our team is planning an all department event, and it's a big event. There's 300 of us. So we need volunteers to plan the agenda, to plan what is going to be eaten, to plan the activities and whatever. So what happens typically? Women volunteer to make all the plans. Women volunteer to lead the nutrition, whatever is going to be eaten, what snacks are going to be eaten, to question who has an allergy, who doesn't have an allergy. If we are going to go do an activity, is there transportation that is needed to get to the place, or are we going to walk? Who is going to check on the weather on that day? Like all that labor of trying to make this event happen successfully, typically women volunteer. Now the crossover, it is patriarchy, number one, because patriarchy basically says women have to carry the labor of doing all the things men just show up. Like Sharon said, how was your day? It was great. I woke up, I had breakfast, I went to work. What the man is not saying is, he woke up, his wife had set his clothes on the bed for him, planned for him what he was going to wear. And I'm not saying that this is what happens for all men. There are men who are really good about that. However, there are men who don't even know where their underwear and their socks are. The woman is the one who is planning on that in addition to planning for the kids. And that is how men are being conditioned, right? Capitalism Men have to go out and bring the cheese home, bring the money home. So for them, their labor is physical labor, go to work, make the money, bring the money home. And typically they don't say it in these words, but they don't give a shit about how the home is running. Like somebody else do all the things. And if they come home and shit is everywhere because the kids were playing, not their problem. Hii nyumba ni chafu sana. I will use Kiswahili today, which means the house is dirty or untidy. Why is the house? And unfortunately, even for the stay-home mom who doesn't have help, who has been with 4 kids all day, woke up, did breakfast, cleaned the house, did all the things, and is running this home as a well-oiled machine. This man will come home and say, what have you been doing all day? I'm tired. I worked all day. But men tend to realize that they tend to get to know what the emotional labor of running a household looks like, of what it looks like when the wife either gets sick or she dies or she leaves and leaves him with his children, and now he has to do all the things. And if if she doesn't leave him a list of everything that needs to happen and all the things he has to take care of, typically men are not able to handle, which is why culturally we tend to get a wife for a man whose wife has died very quickly, because we already know that he's not going to be able to handle whatever is happening in the household. Now, does that apply to all men? No. On the flip side, and this is based on my interaction with men in where I live in the US, there are men who are carrying that emotional labor and I'm glad you brought up the idea that women say, I need another wife, which is not literally needing another wife. It's basically having multiple people you can delegate certain tasks to, right? Men don't do that because men have not been conditioned to do that. So if a man is married, has young kids, the wife is in school and is working, typically happens in the US where the man is working a regular job, or maybe has decided to stay home so that the wife can pursue a career. Typically happens when the wife is in the medical field, because the shifts are not predictable. The what do you call it? The practicals, right? When you have to do your practicals, that's not predictable. So you're gone at odd hours of the night, you're still doing school and all that. So the man takes the running of the household himself. He has to do that, has to figure out the kids and whatever. They have that, they take on the emotional labor of running the home, but they're not equipped because of how they are socialized and conditioned from childhood. So there is the suffering, the silent suffering that is happening within our community, where men are struggling but don't know how to ask for help, don't know how to communicate to the wife that there's a struggle. And so you find the marriages are breaking, or the man is going and starting to numb with alcohol or drugs or something else, which then goes down to the children. Firstborn child, male or female, starts taking on the emotional labor of running the household because dad is incapable or mom is incapable, and therefore somebody has to step up. So that's how I would say it's affecting the home in terms of male versus female in my experience.
So, Saya, has it always been like this? Is this emotional labor thing Western influence, or how did Okonkwo handle all his wives and children?
There's a way you framed the question that's a bit unfair. That's why I'm posing. If the question is, the way you frame the question is the emotional labor only for women, When you think about it historically, the way our societies were structured is polygamy was polygamy was not a love thing. You know, when you used Okonkwo and his wives, polygamy was not out of love. Polygamy was out of necessity. And many times it was the first wife who proposed polygamy because the workload was a lot. So in many actual African cultures, the interesting thing is the first wife participated, vetted, and in some cases brought the second, third, whichever number of wives. And this was just in direct response if there was no mechanization and the mainstay was agriculture. So additional workforce was gotten through getting more wives in a culture that was not polyandrist, but permitted polygamy. So one way of dealing with the physical labor and its attendant emotional labor was through polygamy, the institution of polygamy, and the women were part and parcel of it, with exception of a few cultures like the where the women were not per se involved. And then secondly is we need to realize that prior to modernity and colonial influence, there was distinct division of labor. So if your society was a mixture of some form of hunting and gathering and farming, the higher risk jobs were given to men. Higher risk being hunting, gathering, fighting were men-led and men-initiated. So men would go out to hunt, gather, and women would probably do more of the tilling. But this was not because of patriarchy or anything. It was just it was a level of risk that was involved. And back then, the warriors, the guys who defended the society and everything were men. So in such a society, from a labor point of view, the division of labor was such that it was based on strength and amount of risk. And when it became overwhelming, polygamy was often the result. But there were other solutions to the task of excessive labor and the burden of raising children, which was people were raised more communally. So the children were community property. So in many cases, even in places say that were polygamous, feeding was not done at the home level, at the nuclear home level. It was done a bit more centrally. And this was in part to A, manage costs and logistics, but also B, was a very smart way of managing things like discipline, value transmission, checking in on everyone. Things were done a bit more centrally. So were also things like farming. The farming arrangement that happened those days was a bit more communal. Very interesting, funny story was some guy came and observed where this practice was still going on, where what we do is, if, say, we the panelists, each one of us has a farm, today we all decide we are going to, Monday we go dig Tony's farm, Tuesday we will meet and dig Joanne's farm, all of us. You know, Wednesday we'll go to Posa's, then Thursday we'll go to Sharon's, Friday will come to me. And one guy observed this and said, this is inefficient, this is not working. And he bought them a tractor because he assumed like a tractor would do, it would plow. So the tractor was bought, you know, he went back all happy. He came back, I think, a season later or a year later, and he found them back to their old ways and asked them, like, what happened to the tractor? He said, like, it's parked, it's over there. We don't use it. Why? It's because in addition to the arrangement, that arrangement sorting out physical and emotional labor, it was also their way of bonding. And so now when you took it, when you brought in a tractor, it eliminated many other would-be things. We also need to remember in Africa, the places of labor were the places of instruction. So when the duties were split between women doing more like kitchen and home duties, and men going out to either do war or do hunting or gathering or do the heavy building and lifting. The men would be taking their fellow, the upcoming men, and in the process of working was also the process of mentoring, teaching them what it was to be a man, teaching them what it was to be a woman if you're in the kitchen. And we may put it up there for that this was maintaining stereotypes and stuff, but we also need to understand that our labor posts were also our learning posts, and we used a very apprenticeship kind of model. Then finally, one of the times of biggest labor was around literal labor, when a woman was getting ready to give birth. And how that was handled in the African context was, and still, when I lived and worked in Tanzania, I realized that that is still maintained up to now, is the women would come around a woman during that time. And like in the Tanzanian setting, expectant women are still go back to their mothers during the months leading to delivery and thereafter. Both in those settings and originally, as initially thought, this was to shield the new mother from the taxation of physical and emotional labor, and everything around was taken care of. And you'd almost understand in a time when our understanding of gynecological practices and stuff was not what it is now. And also because of the amount of reserve that existed, it only made sense that women would take care of fellow women. So yes, there were many institutions put in place to achieve this. I think the modernization of life for the African male, and he has not been relieved from the expectation and requirements to do some of the duties he did back then, which was largely provision. Right now, he's not fighting he's not hunting in a bush or gathering somewhere in the forest, but he's really doing the same in a concrete jungle. And there is, I'm speaking here as a man, there is emotional labor attached to that, but it's just that the reorientation did one thing, is it made women have to enter the formal workforce, which was not something that was there for the larger part, both in the Western, in the West, actually, women got largely into the workforce during the World Wars. But also now, just speaking to the African context, is this shift into modernity made the woman enter the workforce. And when you therefore look at what is substantially called emotional labor, when you backtrack it, is because she's had to take on what was traditionally not her duties, the work of providing for and everything, and in addition, still maintain her many of the traditional roles, as it were. I think this is where the seesaw of balance is still there. Back to four.
So this seesaw of balance, Tony, how is it showing up in your coaching life?
First of all, I want to appreciate Saya for just bringing to the fore that even we dudes experience emotional labor, but I don't want to take away anything from what Joanne said. I think even in my practice that I have realized that women shoulder the larger of the burden. But because, like I was saying earlier, the original definition was kind of, because it was given by someone and they were referring to the unpaid labor, it has evolved to include other forms of emotional labor. Like I remember I watched a video where a Black woman in the West was talking about how they have to endure racial slur. So somebody will refer to them in a certain way because they are woman and they are Black, and they have to manage their emotions as they are responding. And if you are to take that simple example and think about a Gen Z or a millennial being judged by elders, and then they have to check their emotions because we are judging their behavior, you can see that the emotional labor has extended beyond some places that we didn't think about, because it is the elderly most of the times who will correct the young because they feel they have authority, they feel they have, they can say things to, they can speak, not speak with, but, not talk with, but talk to. So in terms of that dynamic where people, like at work, where you have bad bosses, or where you are the person that your family looks upon and highly depends on you for, say, maybe financially, you can see that it extends this work of you're trying to keep this relationship alive. So a lot of times you don't reveal your true feelings about these people nagging you. At the place of work, you are not allowed in some cases to voice your objections because your boss is a tyrant, for instance. So you can see it has extended, but primarily it is shouldered more by women, but it has shown up in the ways that I'm telling you. The generational issues at work are bringing about a level of emotional labor, and circumstances in families where somebody is doing well. Remember, we had talked about black tax in this very forum. In a case like a black tax space where you are unable to stop or to manage this issue, where you are the one that has to pay for everything, it really bothers you emotionally, but you love your family and you want to keep this bond well, so you don't show your true emotions. So I've seen it occurring in those ways.
Okay, Sharon, I'm not Sikuruki. There's English word has gone. I just want to go to Joanne because she needs to leave. So Joanne, so what? Yeah, now we have emotional labor. So what should we do?
I think a few things can happen. One is education forums like this, because some of these things are new now with us having a digital world or living in a digital world. Educating people or self-educating and learning about these things, that would help. But also undoing the conditioning that we have. How do I want to say this? Undoing the conditioning that we condition men or boys in the homes to basically step back and assume that certain roles or certain things have to be done by women, which is not only detrimental to the women, it's also detrimental to the men, because when they are met with a situation where they have to figure out certain things, they're ill-equipped, right? They're ill-equipped and they just don't know how to do the thing that they need to do. And therefore it goes back again to the women because they don't know. So one, I think the very first thing we collectively have to do is give boys permission to fail. Give your young boys permission to fail. Secondly, men in general, give yourself permission to feel. Give yourself permission to feel your whole range of emotions, whatever they are. But more importantly, be safe as a man for other men to be able to feel. Because for women, we have our other women or our other wives. I can go to Posa and cry and say, this is happening. And Posa will be empathetic and she will hold space for me and she'll be able to say, okay, this is how I can help you. Men, when a man is going through life and life is hard and things are coming at him fast and furious, the minute he shows emotion, we start throwing words like and this has to be said in Kiswahili, so I'm sorry for anybody who is not Kenyan, wacha umama, which means stop being a woman, right? Men are horrible, and I don't say this lightly. We laugh about it, but men are horrible to each other when it comes to emotions and hard things. You turn around and make fun of each other. You create these memes that we all laugh about that are really truly not funny, because this is why men are dying by suicide. This is why we have addiction issues. This is why homes are falling apart. And your sons and the little boys around you are watching you, and they're learning how to be men and humans from you. So even though you're not doing this to them as children, they are learning that that is not a thing to do. Because when my grandmother died and dad cried, my uncles told him to stop being a woman. So that means women are the only ones who are allowed to cry. So when this little boy's mother dies, he knows not to cry, not to feel, not to do anything, because he has seen how the men in his circles operate. So that is number 2. Men, allow yourselves to feel and be safe for other men, because the boys are learning from you. Number 3, in the workplace, stop acting like these planning duties are not for you. You enjoy the end result of women doing all the labor and the planning and all the things. So teach yourself how to volunteer for these things. And when your instinct tells you to go ask a woman, so where should I find the food? Who is the vendor? Go to the yellow pages or go to the internet. The same way you would find a vendor for a bachelor party. You never ask women to plan a bachelor party for you. You find the strippers, you know how to find all these things. So you are capable and able to find those things for even the workplace things, right? And the home things. Now, I'm not saying that women should not help, but encourage your men to do the thing. So for us as women, I would encourage us to stop giving ourselves tasks, to stop automatically volunteering to do the things when there are men in the room. Let the men do it. And don't micromanage the men when they say they're going to do something. Let them do it, even if it doesn't turn out to be in your standards, because we tend to have these standards. And so if the man says, I'm going to plan a date and I'm going to take care of everything, you insert yourself and start planning and start interfering with his plans, because innately you've been conditioned to not believe that he is capable of doing all those things. Let him plan, let things fall apart, let him learn from things falling apart, because even for us to be the great planners and the great all the things, something somewhere fell apart and you learned from it. So that's what I would offer for us from a female and a male perspective, and from a workplace and a home perspective. Back to you, Posa.
Do the other panelists have a question for Joanne before she leaves?
They're like, oh my God, Tony's just laughing because it's like, oh, what did I sign up for?
I think signing up for anything with me is usually a risk. So I'm a Joanne. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah.
I know you're going to hang in the background, but yeah.
For a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sharon, vuka sakafu unyo aste. So let me ask, I know there's so many nutrition guides. We've done keto, we've done everything, someone with a solution. Why is it essential for you to dig up all these things, including emotional labor, before you start, you take on a client? In simple words, nutrition and weight loss, kizungu najua imepotea, go on.
It's all good. I'll attempt to answer the bit of the question that I remember, which is how nutrition, if I heard you correctly, how nutrition ties into it and why it's important to get to the root. I recently watched a video on Instagram about a Chinese method of asking questions, trying to get to the root why. And usually this really pisses off my clients because I'll ask, why are you here? You know, why are we having this session? And they're like, because I want to lose weight. Why? Because, you know, why? And they're like, what do you mean, why? I want to lose weight because, like, no, tell me, just humor me, please. It's going to be an annoying session. I'm going to underwhelm you. Even in the menu, I'll tell you things, you know. So just humor me. Let's see if we're a good fit for each other. And very often when you work towards the root why, there are tears, there are unresolved feelings, there's a lot of frustrations, a lot of anger, and sometimes this is the first space that people have been able to just talk about how they really feel without feeling judged. It's harder to speak the truth when you're talking to your pastor or your sibling or your friend because you fear judgment. There's a certain image you're trying to project. But when you're meeting Sharon and she's a referral from a friend, it's a little easier. Also, let's just be honest about the fact that it's taken a long time for us as Africans or as Black people to accept therapy, just the idea of therapy. Why? It goes against a lot of what we heard growing up. You don't air your dirty linen outside. You don't tell people your business. And I know this to be particularly true for, again, the women, because I can speak as a woman. It's, you know, a good woman doesn't sell her secrets or doesn't tell people what's going on at home. In fact, the only time you're talking ill about your partner, it's to another married woman so that she can give you some advice on what you can do, because surely you must be doing something wrong. And that's essentially the idea. So why I'm always asking why, the reason why we need to work on it is because for a long time, I did make the mistake of thinking the weight issue is here. We just need to fix the fruits, the vegetables, the sleeping, and the water intake, and they need to engage in physical activity and we are good. Then I worked at a weight loss company and I realized very many clients I used to interview them very intentionally and ask questions. And I realized so very many of them had a particular storyline. I have been doing this for a long time. I have always been the heavy one. I have always been told beauty is to be skinny or athletic. My siblings are not as heavy as I am. I was an incubator baby. And I realized, wait, so there are other things happening in the background before we wind up at, this is how much I weigh, and it is so bad that it's hurting my knees, or it's so bad that I'm having trouble sleeping and staying asleep, or it's so bad that I've developed an autoimmune disease, or it's aggravating some other inflammatory disease that I have. So when we get to the root why, we are able to help an individual find the real drive behind what they're doing, and that increases our chances of success. So if I'll be completely honest here, anyone who's ever come to me to say they're losing weight because their partner said they're fat, that weight doesn't stay off. It will come off sometimes. They will even lose the 15 kilos or the 20 kilos, but the minute the partner leaves or something happens in that relationship, since the motivation is pegged on someone else, it's problematic. Since we are talking about emotional labor and the fact that a lot of it falls on women, it's the same way if I get a client who is on prescription medication, diabetics are just a favorite of mine, and I ask them, so what are you on? What's the dosage? When did you start using this? If I notice they're constantly turning to look at their wife, and then they're like, what was it called again? Was it glucophage? You know, when they don't remember their prescription meds, or it's the wife, the meds are in the wife's handbag, then I can already tell in my head we're going to have a problem because they have outsourced their health and well-being to someone outside of themselves. So then I start to ask difficult questions like, so if she's not there, and for some of them, it's a shock. Like, wait, what do you mean? She can actually like not be here. I'm like, yeah, if she could go home for a funeral without you, or she could be stuck somewhere in traffic, and you are in the office and your sugars are low and no one in your office knows that you're a diabetic because utakufa kimwanaume. I don't know how to say that in English. Men I don't know, but like men do not speak of their pain. They have to show strength, and they hide, when they are sick. I tell people, when I have a cold, everyone knows. So there's this, again, it's just society constantly telling us that we have to put a certain face. And so I get to the root why, so that we break that down and figure out what is your motivation? What are the issues that are sabotaging your behavior? Why have you been on diets for 6, 7, 10 years? There must be something that was not addressed. Also, there's a general tendency for people to think, I was on this diet, it was successful. I'm like, then why are you here? Success is not losing 30 kilos because it came back. Success is actually after losing the weight, having a healthy relationship with your food, no longer counting calories, no longer feeling anxious about having a slice of cake, no longer feeling bad about having a sip of Coca-Cola, having normalized eating vegetables to a point where if you don't eat them, you feel weird, walking because you enjoy it, going to the gym because you feel good and it helps you manage your anxiety, not because I have to keep the weight off. When you are living your life and your health and wellness is not a job taking up real estate at the bottom of your head or your neck, then that's when it's a healthy habit. So we have to address those issues so that the healthy habit building is sustainable. Like it lasts a long time, long after you've left Sharon's office and you're doing it on your own.
Okay, so switching from the nutrition side, because this is a very Kenyan habit, can we just, are the emotional vampires part of emotional labor? Those people who ask lawyers, can I, a quick one, and it's a whole consultation that would have cost 50,000, or they're sending you their medical imaging, medical issues, and just expect you to always answer them and do their consultation free of charge, and you're never supposed to complain, or they just unload on you on your WhatsApp, your text, everything, something that they should go see a therapist for. Is it part of emotional labor? And anyone on the panel can take this.
Okay, I'll take that. And I saw John had popped in a little bit. I think that one also tickled her fancy a bit. And I see a comment coming in. There's a boundary issue, and I agree. Remember, I was talking about how the issue has expanded, and we as people who offer services, I was sharing. I'm in a WhatsApp group, and very interesting that I had not even thought about it until now that I'm answering this question, but it fits squarely into this conversation. We talk about men's conference during Valentine's, and in Kenya we had all these men who were organizing events for men. I saw one of organizing a mbuzi for baby daddies. I saw others inviting men, for some of these celebrities inviting men to go and have a chat, and they were charging for it. And in my WhatsApp group, the men, we have a group, it's a group of people that I grew up with. So we also have a men's group in that, a separate men's group from from everybody else. So in that group, those posters were thrown in there, and then somebody started saying, why are they charging for these things? And they started saying that if you really want to help men, you need to offer this one for free, so that we see that it's there's something there. Then the next one, you start charging something small. Then as a person who does consulting, as a person who charges for services, I said, the first thing that I am is pleased that we are dealing with men's issues, and we are dealing with them openly, and we're inviting men for a forum where we can have men talking. I think that they should actually charge because they are offering a service and they're offering value. And I told them that as a person who offers value, in our country, there's still an issue where people do not value what is intangible. They'll pay for this cup. But if you tell them to go and see Coach John for life coaching, and she gives them goals, and or Sharon, and tells them that Sharon can help you with your dieting issues, they're going to say, but what will I get? If they can't see something that they can touch, something they can, something visible, they are having a problem. And I think it fits in with the question you're asking. People do not see like they are crossing boundaries when they're asking you questions about what exactly that's how you earn a living. Like they will now talk to Sharon and ask Sharon, what's your opinion on carrots and whatever? Then Sharon will answer quickly without much thought. Then this person will type another text on Word and then paste it on your WhatsApp, and it's a whole consultation. And I believe, like one of the participants, Angela, has said, it's a boundaries issue, and a lot of people, and me, I'll speak about Kenyans in particular, we don't realize that that services it takes work for us to research those things. We are not. Sharon, you don't do a quick Google search because someone has asked you that. Maybe they had done that before they asked you. John, I'm sure when someone is asking you, and I mean the things you're telling us here today, they're not coming from. You didn't sit here today to tell us this. You went and did some work when you knew you were coming to talk here, and that's what they don't realize, Posa, in my assessment, that it is a job like any other. Just because there's nothing tangible, they don't see value. I think it is growing because, I mean, that's how I earn a living. I think it is growing, but there are some people who don't quite see that value, and yet they have those great needs, and they can actually afford to pay for that. They could actually have organized to meet Sharon for her services, and they can actually benefit more from that. Because to digress a little bit, I used to offer coaching to youngsters for free, because they don't have the money to pay. Then they started misusing it. So we have a contract that we have signed, and there are agreements, and we are agreeing that you'll be showing up once every 2 weeks, and in between these 2 weeks, these are the goals that you have to meet. Then the youngsters just disappear on me, and I'm calling. Now I'm using money to try to reach you. I'm trying to look for you, and you're not coming back. Then you say, oh, I got a job, or oh, I did this and I have no time. I realize that we don't value what we don't pay for. We don't value it much. So even for youngsters, even if they're in campus, I tell them, what can you afford? Without dying, I tell them, don't die. I don't want you to say coaching is bad. What can you afford and continue living? And I've coached people for as little as 500 bob per session, because I told them that I want you to have some skin in the game. I understand that you're in college. I understand you don't make money, but you eat, but you travel. So you do have some money. If you think this is worth it, what can you afford to give away? And at the same, in the same vein, and particularly friends, I'm sorry to say this because I have very good friends, but we friends, I'm also friends to someone, and I will do the same to Sharon. I'll ask a question to Sharon, forgetting that that's how she earns her bread. That's what we friends do to each other. We forget that we should be supporting you and not getting advice from you for free if we can pay for it. So I think the friends are the ones that ought to observe boundaries. And I'm not saying that because I'm the best friend. I'm saying I'm also friend to such people, and I'm addressing me and everybody else, that we friends are the ones who should take the first step in asking. And I have good friends who do that. Like I went to see my friend the other day. They needed to consult me on something that I train on, and I went. And after I was done, they told me, invoice me. And I invoiced. And there are friends like those who value what you do. They're inviting you because they don't want you to give your expertise for nothing. They want to pay for it. Back to you, Posta.
Thank you. I think Joanne wanted to say something.
I do. I love that Tony phrased it all that way, because as a boundaries teacher, that is the number one thing I teach the people who I'm coaching in my class. Mm-hmm. Is it that you don't have money, or is it not in your priorities? Because really, at the end of the day, people find, if you observe, even the brokest of the brokest humans find money for the things they want, find money for the things that are priority to them, including the students. Many of them will go ask their parents or their teachers or somebody, they will find money. So for me as a coach, I am not giving services for free unless it's community service. And even my friends, my family, I have a calendar, book an appointment. We are not doing this on WhatsApp. We are not, like, I literally ask, what is the purpose of this? Like, do you need services, Or are you venting, or do you need advice? And if you need advice from a coaching perspective, I am also learning to value myself, because if you don't value yourself and the services you offer, then you're unable to charge for those services. You're unable to price your services, right? So one of the things I also don't do is people will send these long emails for you to for me as a coach to help them on social media. I give them my link to my calendar. Set up an appointment. I have a free consultation. We can talk about that. After that, you're going to pay me. So what I say about all this is, for those of us who are service givers or service providers, or are in careers where you're helping people, our default setting is to help, to answer questions, because you want people to do better. So you have to value yourself and your services. You have to also value the amount of time you use in learning the content that you learn, because that is labor that goes unnoticed and unrecognized. Figure out how much time do you spend in a week to come up with the content that you create. So it doesn't always have to be a flat no for everything and everyone. But if you want your followers, for those of us who are on social media, or the people who need this information to have it for free, you can post it on your social media for free. Then if they ask you for services, you can charge. But for those who are on the receiving end, who think there is no value in coaching, whether it's nutritional, whether it's life coaching, whether it's career coaching, or all the things, I see people saying, I need somebody to write my resume for me. For a person to write your resume for you or your CV for you, they have acquired a skill through learning for many years for them to be able to do that for you. Pay them. So learn to be like Tony's friend, where when somebody gives you advice that you could have paid for somewhere else, ask them for an invoice, or ask how much are you going to charge. Let's be good stewards of other people's businesses. Let's stop negotiating and underpaying for services. And I typically use on the US side, illustration of Maasai Market. For those of us who are Kenyans, we go to Maasai Market and buy things, right? When we are here in the US, if I go to a Michael Kors shop, I will not negotiate. I will say, that's not within my budget. Let me go save my coins and come back and purchase this thing. But when we go to Maasai Market and the bag is 500 shillings, we want to negotiate to pay 100 shillings, which is in dollars, $1 or less. Let's stop doing that. Or when you go to a Kenyan business in the US, you don't want to pay $2 for a samosa, yet this person bought unga, did all the things, the labor of creating that samosa. But when you go to an Indian, you'll pay $5 for the same samosas. Let's stop doing that. Let's value our people, and let's value first ourselves, because if you don't value yourself, you're not going to value other people. So please, please, please value yourself and then value others, and lead by example. And I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to get out because I have a class starting soon. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Posa. Thank you, Saya. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Joanne. And in the same breath, let's just avoid, the people who want you to explain a whole thesis on social media on why you've put a free post, but they want you to put a PhD thesis as to why that is correct. just pay them. Pay them, and sometimes it's not even too much money. Pay them for their time. It's, as Lizzie has said, it's hard to swallow, but very, very true. Sharon,
Google University is free. YouTube University is free. Go do your own research. Stop having people do the labor for you. You have the same access to all the things we have access to. So let's just stop being that person. Okay, bye, guys.
And if you want to seek clarification, pay Joanne, pay Sharon, pay Saya. Maybe I'm still free for now. Sharon, unless you want to do the same question, I want to take a religious tangent, and that is usually Saya. So do you have any, Amatuen? We go to Saya. We go to Saya.
Yeah, we can go to Saya. I feel like they've covered it really well. My goodness, pay us, please. We work hard.
So Saya, because you have been a victim and Sharon and I have been almost beating you up. So let's talk about let's talk about the Proverbs 31 woman and emotional labor. 2, let's talk about the emotional labor pastors, priests, religious leaders do, and Waumini, because there's no better than Waumini, expects it to be free. Yes.
Okay, and almost at the risk of being branded toxic masculinity, you realize the second part of your story has its men. It's really many of the clergy who are doing the free service. A majority are men. It's expected to be free. Yeah, there's a big risk of the emotional labor we can genderize it, but I really think both parties, the men and it's just that I know they have begun the answer on a tangent. It's just the same way men are not very good at explaining their emotion to themselves, to their women, to anybody. I think also makes their emotional labor go under-recognized, undervalued. And I'm in no shape or form saying women do not have emotional labor. I actually don't think it's a gender thing. I think both parties have. One meme that really brings it, 2 memes that I saw. One was some manual laborers, guys who had done building construction, Koroga. There's no, some words English does not bring nicely, who I think on their lunch break, so they were basically sleeping on the concrete, like they were so broke, they were sleeping on the concrete. And then the meme was saying, then it's said in Swahili, but the loose translation is, then you go back home and somebody asks you, what have you been doing the whole day? Another one again is from building construction, is a guy in some, those construction photos that you see and begin giving you anxiety. Some guys dangling some place, or when you consider the earlier last year, there's a whole series of jokes about Mjengo, what foremen tell the foremen tell the people. And so men go through a lot of stuff out there, but I just think because we are taught to bottle it up, we come back home with our emotional labor, and maybe don't manage it well. We ease off at home or stuff like that. But end of rant, comes to the question. The Bible, Paul referring to a statement in the Old Testament, makes it very clear. He says the laborer is worth his due. You don't muzzle an ox when it's treading when it's treading. For those who don't understand, what that means is, back then, before we had steam engines and modern equipment, what would happen is, either in the wine press or in the places where you'd be threshing corn, the thing that would provide the power would be an ox. And so by law, God had told the children of Israel, you can't tie the mouth of your cow when it's operating in that, your ox, when it's doing that duty. It needs, as if it is threshing floor for you, it needs to be able to eat of that. You can't, that's why the statement says, you don't muzzle an ox when it's at work. So and Paul makes a very brilliant statement. He basically says, no man goes to war, fighting for his country on his own terms. We don't have self-sponsored KDF members or whichever countries, but with the corruption in some of our countries, you never know. I had stories of policemen having to bribe to get additional uniform. So let me put this way: in properly functioning countries, the American military, Marines are not self-sponsored. They don't pay themselves that way. So there is a biblical, at least from in faith, there's a biblical understanding in the text of the Bible that individuals who labor, and a lot of the labor within the faith circles is it's heavily emotional. There is some physical element involved to it, like if you're going for a mission trip, there's a physical thing, there's physical goods, but a lot of it has a lot to do with listening to people, praying with people, caring for people, checking on people, at times at weird times. And this consummate degrees of labor, the text of scripture, if we're to be obedient to it, says that individuals need some form of compensation that goes alongside with it. However, two things have happened. It could be more, but I could think of two at the top of my mind. One is a misunderstanding or a misapplication of grace. Grace is the idea that Christ has paid it all for us, and he has, but that covers the issue of our sin, our justification with God. We have unfortunately extended that to mean every other domain. So to get good pastoral care, whether it is people counseling with you or people, just a good sermon takes time to prepare. All the degrees of pastoral care, being with you in the towers of grief, burying our dead, marrying our living, praying for our newborn, visiting, all of those things take time. Two, they take a lot of the person. There's a whole amount of studies on pastoral burnout just because of that, the work they do. And so individuals who offer this, whether pastors or whichever labeling they are given, I think need to be compensated. It is obedient to the text of scripture, and it is also honoring to the work that they do. They need to be compensated. And compensation here is A, monetary, but also B, there needs to be opportunities to debrief. Otherwise, emotional laborers without appropriate emotional outlets will end up becoming emotionally burnt out. And there's, especially during like the COVID period, there's been a lot of studies done about just genuine pastoral burnout. So to demand that the people who've dedicated themselves to this thing should do it without any form of compensation is to be, at the very least, unfair, at the very worst, unbiblical, as it were. There's a myriad of there's a myriad of arrangements for supporting oneself within ministry, and none is superior to the other. So we often use, one of the misused passages is Paul. Paul says, I worked with my own hands, to give you an example. But it is the same Paul who said, though I am entitled to be paid to get support from you, I chose. His decision to work with his own hands to take care of his needs was exactly that. It was a choice. So it's not the tent making model or working with your own hands is not the only model. It works in spaces. So for instance, if you're operating in a space where there's no, say, Christian presence and stuff, you may need to work with your own hands and figure out how to do that. And so that needs to be a clear calling. But if there's a place where there is structure and opportunity for you to bless and give directly to people who are laboring, please, by all means, I think people need to be supported on that. everything I've said so far is tempered by one reality. A lot of what we offer in church is volunteer. A lot of it is volunteerism. So I don't have a clear place where the line is drawn. You know, you probably won't walk over to me and I charge you for prayers, you know, or you won't send me a text asking what the meaning of a particular verse is, and I send you an invoice. That would be weird. But the word I'm thinking here is in Swahili. It's called utashi. You just need to be wise. If you're going to be gaining value from a space, you need to be able to give some amount of value back. For I forgot the first part of your question. I realized I began with a spiritual side and labor. I forgot the first part of your question.
It was on the Proverbs 31, and I just want you to touch on the amount of emotional labor that the especially the pastoral care in the US is, all those visitations, these people, just the reality on the ground. I feel like it's a bit different home, but just go, if you can touch on both. Proverbs 31.
The pastoral care is not just an American phenomenon. It's everywhere. Just imagine those rural places where one pastor is in charge of 10 congregations, 7 congregations, just because the level of giving is such that it cannot sustain many pastors. And if there's a place where religion or faith is baked into everyday life, it's in the rural places. There are people who pray for or need the pastor for everything from praying for the seed to the planting to the harvest and any other function in between. So there is a lot of emotional expectation here in the US because of the nature of people working, 8 to 5, Sunday to Sunday, people working. The one benefit in Africa is the system, like elders and deacons are almost like associate pastors. So in well-organized churches, part of the labor is then distributed to these elders and deacons, to go out. But here in the US, because of the A, nature of specialization, B, the demands of capitalism, people living that way, a lot of them, that nurture element is transferred to the pastors, who then have to burn on both ends because they have to fit into the schedules of the members. And because members are working double shifts, you find pastors have to do visitations at all manner of weird hours. And the expectation here is you need to be there. Fine, you may not have 6, 7 congregations like happens back home in Africa, but you have one extremely demanding congregation, and geographically can be a bit way more spread out than it is back home in Africa. The end result is if without proper boundaries, pastors end up becoming really, really fatigued, really burnt out, as it were, emotionally, and it's relentless. There is, again, as I've said, studies, and this is one area I think Christian domain is accepting that pastoral burnout and the demands on them is a real thing, and pastors are being encouraged to take time to self-care, and members and churches will need to, we will need to rethink church. Okay, we will need to rethink church. One, when you begin having congregations of 200 members and over and expect a pastor to be there, it might not work. We might need to rethink church to become more Old Testament based, so that it operates within homes, or what some other congregations call cells, because then
New Testament.
New Testament, sorry. It becomes easier to provide nurture and support at cell members giving each other support than expecting one pastor to do everything. Those are some of the solutions being toyed around. The Proverbs 31 woman, again, is one section of scripture which, if you read with Western eyes, you misread, because what Proverbs 31, the woman is, some people have called her superwoman, Wonder Woman, because of the number of things she does. However, if you properly do a proper exegesis of the text, what it does is it shows you a very empowered woman for the number of things she is doing in the setting she was in. This is only possible with a woman who has an enormous amount of support and liberation, has a very progressive husband. For a woman to be permitted to do all those number of things in a society where a woman's testimony was not even considered admissible in court, where a woman's position was very subservient, for her to even have the opportunity to do that, she has a phenomenal support group around her. However, then the second thing about the Proverbs 31 is it's coming at the end of Proverbs, okay, and it is celebrating. It's a lot of the Proverbs are written by Solomon, so it is no wonder that he just takes time to celebrate what's possible with femininity. I know many people read Proverbs 31 and they're like, wow, this woman is overworked and stuff. But when properly read in context, and we don't bring our Western or modern eyes into it, it is actually something, it's a very beautiful passage of scripture showing what is possible when the woman folk is unleashed, when she is given power and given the requisite support to do and go to where she needs to be. And then secondly, it is evidence of a very supportive structure. However, to give permission to then list all the number of duties she does quite a lot. She considers land and buys it. She makes garments, she trades, she takes care of her home. She's a manager, managing quite an amount of things. If I read with my Western eyes, that's quite an amount of labor she is doing. Her husband is called honored and everything. And so from an outside view, it looks like quite an amount of work. However, just to honor the text of scripture, this would be a woman in the ranks of, if I was thinking biblically, this would be a woman in the rank of Sarah, which would mean should A, have to have a lot of servants to achieve everything she's achieving, and B, should be able to have a lot of support in achieving what she does. However, if we then mistake Proverbs 31 and make that the expectation and demand we place on women, or any other human being for that matter, without providing the requisite context, the requisite support, the requisite environment, emotional overwork and emotional burnout is inevitable. One contentious part of Proverbs 31 is normally when it says the husband sits at the gates and is called honored. Many have thought that mean the husband is just sitting. No, but to sit at the gates, the gates was the equivalent of State House or the equivalent of the county headquarters. So the men who sat at the gates were not idlers. They were the administrators, they were the rulers, they were the judges of the setting. So Proverbs 31, rather than showing an overworked woman and a lazy husband, shows a woman who's in charge of the home business and a man who is thriving in as far as politics or the administration of state is shown, and it shows a very progressive sort of arrangement. It is prone, like any other scripture, it can be misused to try and place unrealistic expectations upon any woman. And I think the best way to respond to any person who expects of a woman what is listed in Proverbs 31 needs to be reminded that they then need to provide the environment and the withal that makes it possible for the Proverbs 31 woman to provide, which is liberty, support, servants, a progressive husband, permission, and all of that. So in an environment like that, then a Proverbs 31 woman is possible. Outside of that, you're going to have a hell of a burnt out individual. And just like with all scripture, if we misread scripture, it can become a powerful tool for extending or propagating abuses, emotional abuse inclusive. But if properly read and understood in context, scripture can become extremely powerful in helping people to be liberated from emotional overwork and helping people get to a point of health and balance. Yep.
So I think we've been on the negative side of emotional labor. Is there a point in life that emotional labor is positive? Like, is there a point? Sharon, ume unmute.
That's the equivalent of a woman removing her earrings.
As in, nishikilie. Is there a point emotional labor is positive or necessary?
I feel like rephrasing that question.
Leo millionaire.
But yeah, it's because I'm like, I have a problem with like those straight line. Is it black or white? 10
Okay.
questions.
Rephrase away.
No, I don't know if I'll rephrase. Okay, let me put it this way. I believe in unity in diversity. And because I identify as a Christian, I believe that the reason why God created the male and female in his image is so that we would complement one another. And so essentially, even as I was listening to Saya talk about the Proverbs 31 woman, like my head was just spinning with, yeah, I mean, she's able to rise early in the morning because she's well rested, contrary to the belief that she's doing everything for everyone. She's actually delegating, she has servants. And when we look at certain communities, so I'll speak specifically to a personal experience. I have very close Muslim sisters, and I've learned a lot about how they look at sharing duties. And when they speak to me about their personal experiences, especially with childbearing and child rearing, then to some degree, I envy them because there's still that close sense of community. Of course, depending on which part of the world you're in. Here in Germany, not so much, but back at the coast of Kenya, for example, because I took a sabbatical and was there for a year, I remember witnessing women literally coming together to offer support, like not just any sort of support. I watched as my friend got foot massages, as whenever she needed to take a nap, her mother-in-law would take the baby away. And I was catered to because they said, oh, her sister has come and she's our guest. And we were allowed to rest so that we would have energy to take care of the baby through the night whenever he'd wake up in need of feeding. And it was such an exciting experience. And she said, Sharon, if I didn't experience motherhood otherwise, I would not be a mother. And so that's just to take away the fact that when we go back to our roots, I'm very pro-Africanism. I'm like, when we go back to our roots and the way we used to do things, I believe culture is supposed to work for us, not the other way around, like the way God said he created the Sabbath for man and not the other way around. If we place it correctly, then we'll realize that when we work together with the aim of everyone's greater good, then we stay on track. That is, we take care of each other's needs. So I literally will be piggybacking on what Joanne has said. Whenever I talk to young people, because I do mentor young people as well, and I hear certain conversations, I hear a young man telling me, my girlfriend broke up with me and she said it's because I was trauma loading. Is that the word? I was trauma dumping on her. And I asked, do you now understand what she meant? Like, did you Google that stuff? Did you figure? It's like, yes, I realized I was constantly leaning on her for emotional support. And then like, okay, so what are you going to do different? Okay, so how are you going to prevent yourself from falling back on the same thing? Because this is what is familiar, to look at a woman as the source of, your support, and encouraging them to start share circles and hang out with the boys and asking young people. I ask young men all the time. So if I were to get you guys to go for therapy, just to consider it, what are some of the things that work? What are some of the things that don't work? And I remember my nephew told me beer and chips. Like if there's food, if there's snacks, if there's something to eat, I'll go. And I said, okay, so if we remove the beer for those who do not want to have alcohol, there for whatever reasons, religious or otherwise, what would, if we had football games, if we had, excuses for, I'm using this very loosely and as a joke, but excuses for men to touch one another, that is when you can play sports, contact sports and stuff like that, then those become spaces where thereafter guys can share about their feelings. And So basically, I'm just throwing like recommendations for stuff that we can do outside of this. Even when I get clients who say that they're burnt out, sometimes I ask questions like, does your partner know? Do they even know that you're here talking to me about wanting to change your lifestyle? The person you live with and wake up next to every single day. So are we even asking the right questions? Sometimes we don't get help because we're not asking for it. And I know sometimes it's a bit of a sticky feeling. The soap operas have lied to us as women and told us that a good man will guess what you're thinking without you having to tell him. Sure, he'll know what to do, whether to pay the bill and when not to pay the bill and when to offer to do this. I'm like, no. That's a bunch of crap. You really need to learn how to advocate for yourself and tell your partner, hopefully without screaming, yelling, and throwing things, I'm exhausted. This is why I'm exhausted. This is what I need you to help me with. When I say I need a day off and I don't want to prepare dinner at least once a week, what I'm saying is don't leave it to me to decide what we are ordering in. I want you to take all of it, all the decisions that day. If you think we should do dishes in the evening, do it. Just get it done. Like learning how to articulate your feelings. It's difficult to do. Confrontation is hard. But there are times when I've started off with a client as just the one person, and then I invite their partner over and it becomes a counseling session. But it's very beneficial because when you do it as a team, which is what I'm going back to, when you come together and you realize, oh, wait, my partner doesn't have a weight problem, but they're helping me on my weight loss journey. And we have the kids on board as well, then we are fixing our finances because we are planning for meals. We are fixing how we are bonding. So it doesn't have to be pizza at the mall. It could also be a walk at Karura Forest. We are learning to have actual conversations. Oh my goodness, our kids are literally starting to talk to us. We are fighting differently. So we are not just throwing hurtful words at each other, and because I have to win this argument, I'll go below the belt. We are learning how to communicate differently. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is actually changing our lives. Because I believe in teamwork. I believe when we're building healthy habits, we also need to bring in accountability. The same way women are saying we need wives. A big part of the reason why feminism has still been frowned upon to this day, and we are looked at as ball busters who are just trying to make men feel bad and the boy child has been forgotten. A big part of the reason why I believe fundamentally that feminism failed us, especially as Black women, is because we left out the men. If you're fighting white supremacy, you will usually tell white people in their positions of privilege to help. So if you're fighting emotional burnout and you feel a lot of the labor is falling on the women, shouldn't we be talking to the men and telling them this is how we are feeling? And instead of cutting you down, divorcing you, leaving you, this is what we need you to help us do. And we would like to work together also because, you know, we are also raising these kids together. We want to do better than our parents did, etc. It's learning to have the difficult conversations with the older generations, etc. I've gone round and round with it, but that's essentially what I would take. Emotional labor doesn't necessarily have to be viewed as a bad thing. I think when we start looking at it as teamwork, that there are things I may be better at than you are, and there are ways you can support me, then we're asking the right questions. We're going about it the right way.
So same questions, Tony. Is the good side of emotional labor, and since it's, oh my gosh, okay, 2 hours. One day we will do this in under 40. No, it's not gonna happen. So what's the way forward? How you can piggyback on what Sharon said, as in, how do we live in this world? Do I need more wives? Do you need more husbands? How do we go about it?
Okay, first, allow me just to go back a bit to Saya and agree with him that woman is empowered, the Proverbs 31 woman. I agree so much with Saya. That book was written by the same man who said laziness, who accused laziness in many of the books before, many of the chapters before Proverbs 31. So he cannot have been advocating for a lazy man. And like Saya said, that man was a leader. And I want to stop at that so that I don't reiterate what he had said, just so that we are all on the same wavelength, that we all support that Proverbs 31 woman. Then I come back to this question and say, I don't think, like Sharon, I agree that emotional labor is not necessarily negative, because we can't actually avoid it completely. It's not something that we can stay without doing. In some cases, when we are heading to burnout, it is a signal. And I love what Saya began by telling us that emotions are dashboards. They tell us what is going on. They indicate that we need to check on something. So my advice, in addition to what Sharon is saying, that we need to have honest and difficult conversations, whether it is happening at home, we need to have those conversations with our spouses. If it is happening at the places of work, like I had said, because it extends away from the workplace, sorry, the home, then we need to figure out how to have those difficult conversations even there. Because if we don't do that, then we run the risk of burnout. We run the risk of all associated problems that come with burnout and stress and anxiety and depression because of unchecked emotional overload, the emotional toll that these things take on us. In the same vein, I want to also say that since anything that has to do with emotions, we are emotional beings, and if we want to study the brain, everything we interpret, most of the things we interpret them emotionally before we interpret them logically. So one other thing that I would recommend is for us to grow our emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence helps us to deal with our emotions. At the very core of emotional intelligence, of course, is self-awareness and being aware of what the emotions the other people are expressing. So once we learn how to do that, and again, this will sound like I'm selling because I'm a coach. Coaches really help people to learn how to deal with emotions and to grow their emotional intelligence. You learn how to identify your emotions, to label them so that you can deal with them. And you learn how to identify how the other person is thinking by growing your empathy so that you can try and fit into their shoes by kind of understanding where are they coming from in this situation. So I don't see Posa, I don't know that she's still with us, but I am saying that one of the things that we could do in addition to the conversations that we're having is to also invest in developing our emotional intelligence. And I've seen a question there, Posa.
Lizzie asks, when you say emotional intelligence, does this include self-emotional management and regulation? Lizzie, inakaa unajua vitu mingi. You can you can actually be there and mute and talk. Lizzie, the floor is yours. Do you want to speak? You don't have to be on camera. I don't bite. Okay, no. Oh, this is too. Oh my God. Okay, this is my high school classmate. Then, when you say emotional intelligence, does this include self-emotional management and okay? So the steps in emotional management, right? In intelligence, you have to be. First of all, you have to know yourself. So self-awareness. Then other awareness. So it all begins with you. Kabla ujue jirani. There's no better word than Joan is not here to police my English. So yeah. So you have to regulate yourself before you regulate others. I hope that, Tushi, that makes it clear. And hi, Tushi, thank you for joining. So same question, Saya. So where do we go from here?
One is to accept emotional labor will be with us, okay? If we it's impossible to care truly about something, truly care about something and not emotionally have some labor, some amount of labor towards them. Even something as mundane as a soccer team you support, there's some emotional investment to it. I keep joking and saying, if you break up with somebody and your heart does not feel it, you need to question what organ you had invested in that relationship. And just to mean it's to divorce emotion from the various posts of labor we put is impossible, okay? And I therefore just think two things are going to have to come to bear. One is going to be boundaries, and there'll be need to refer to the whole session we did about boundaries. What I think is unhealthy is when the emotional labor happens outside of the boundaries or becomes completely unregulated. Because it's very easy to say, hey, when mothers are thinking about planning the children and doing all of that, they are experiencing emotional labor. And therefore, the solution is let's ban work. Work has its place to do. The solution for something like that may be, is there a better way we can split the household chores so that things happen better? But you see, even when doing those household chores, there's still going to be some amount of emotional labor invested into it. Otherwise, that work would be pathetically done or never done at all. So the solution is not scrap away the work bit. It is bring in boundaries so that it is done healthily and there is an ability to communicate needs and to ask for help and be open to receive the help. Then the second thing I think is just the wider sphere of awareness. Now on awareness, I could wax lyrical for hours, but let me say this. Awareness is not attack. So one thing I keep noticing is when men are told you need to become more emotionally aware, it's normally done in a way that makes them feel like, hey, you animals that are disorganized and very cold, sit here, we tell you how these things are done. And when that's the way the story is coming, men will tuck away their emotions. When awareness comes across like when you're vulnerable, you become the next meme, men will not become, aware or even want to know what this animal called emotional labor is. When awareness looks like another new signing for feminism to attack men or for masculinity to toxic masculinity to attack women, both parties will take a posture of defense and fight. But awareness is in its true balanced state is saying, hey, there's this dashboard light. It could be anger, dissatisfaction, burnout, that is saying there's something happening within the engine of my thoughts and my feelings that is not tangible, but is really present there. And so I would like you to be aware about it, and I would feel more loved, and we would be a better society if A, we are able to recognize it and appreciate it, and then B, find a way to support each other through it, rather than blame, as it were, each other through it. So that's awareness. And then awareness in its third level is getting the tools for self-regulation and getting the support to be able to be better at self-projection. Because if you project an unregulated person, you wound. And if you confine a person who needed to be properly projected, you smother. And therefore, the proper tools allow you to regulate yourself well without suppressing, and allow you to project yourself properly without wounding. And the solution is to think to remove emotional labor is basically as dumb as smashing the bulb on your dashboard light because you're not too happy with it telling you you're running low on fuel. It will get rid of the annoyance of the moment, but sooner rather than later, the engine will stop. The same wisdom applies to emotional work. The engines will still need to work. There's still going to be an amount that is going to be invisible, but we can get better at getting the awareness and giving the support to it.
Okay. Is there? I think we've covered almost everything. We can never cover everything, but is there anything I left out, panelists? And if you have a question, please ask it. Tushi, you need a class on what exactly? Just text me or write it here. But the panelists, is there anything I left out? And if you have a question, please ask.
So, Pastor, I wanted to add something I've just remembered in the faith part that Saya talked about church. I want to talk about para-church, that in the same vein, the very same way Saya was telling us that a laborer is worth their wages, in my country, in Kenya, the whole issue of raising support for people who work alongside church is still foreign. I am grateful that some of the churches here have sensitized the congregations that people who are serving, sometimes, like in my church, an intern is allowed to raise support, and they are paraded, and we are told so and so is our intern, and we are asking you to support them. Now, there are many parachurch organizations that do some fantastic work, but when they come to raising support, it is a hot potato. And one of the questions that the smart people, especially, who work hard to earn their shillings, ask them, are you asking me to give you money? You stay at home. You're asking me that you sit there, I give you my hard-earned money. And I think that narrative needs to also be taught. I'm going back to the faith part where we were talking about supporting these people, because even they go through the same labor of the same emotional labor because of the work that they do to serve the body of Christ. And I think it's a conversation that we need to keep having to sensitize people that when they are raising support, it's not laziness, it is the work that they do that requires them to get paid in this manner. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Sharon, do you have any additional comments?
I'd wanted to touch a little on what Tony had said with regard to just how religion affects the way we look at things and how we think about things. There's a lot that we carry on our shoulders. I think you called it emotional load. There's a lot that we carry on our shoulders because the way Christianity was handed over to us as Africans was very violent and very painful. It was a bunch of people showed up, our land was taken from us. We were told that the way we practiced our faith as Africans was bad, and we needed to just stop it and change. And there's something that's very demeaning to a person when you tell them that their culture, the thing they hold sacred, is bad or dirty or demonic. And so even with the way we deal with things, and again, it's also sort of adding to what Saya has said about how we message things. We need to, I'm a huge fan of getting to the root why. I'm a huge fan of questioning everything. And as a result, I'm a huge fan of people who practice their faith from a basis of knowledge and understanding, as opposed to the people I cannot stand are the ones who say things like, but you know, my pastor said, like, is it in the Bible? You know, or because I was told. I have heard that people from a certain place are a certain way. Have you met anyone from that place? Like the biases that we come with into relationships, or the preconceived ideas and stereotypes we have about people and things. This bleeds into my work with regard to a conversation I've been having recently about fat phobia and medical gaslighting. When an overweight person walks into a hospital to seek medical care, very often everything that they are suffering from is really tied to their weight. It's a lot like how very many women have said they've gone undiagnosed with issues because doctors don't take their pain seriously, especially if it's related to, like, say, period pain. How does this tie into emotional labor? It's when people feel invisible, when people don't feel seen and heard, they behave a certain way. Actions become very reactionary. And so we need, what my encouragement to everyone who's listening is to do the work. Learning about your stuff and learning how to, doing that inner child work and paying a coach to help you deal with stuff and going for therapy is not easy. And I'm not just talking about the finances that go into it. I mean, it is hard. It is difficult to face your demons. However, staying the same is also very difficult. You just stay as you are and you always ask yourself, what if? And that's also painful. And one thing I learned from my first therapist is choose your hard. Choose whether you're going to stay where you're hurting or you're going to try change, which will be uncomfortable for a time before it becomes your new normal. So it's pick the hill that you will die on. And that's the thing I would like to leave everyone with. We are all left with a choice. This is a good session. We've addressed some issues, but then now you have to go home and make a decision. And I just hope that the decision you make is for your better good for yourself and for your family and for your community, but starting with yourself. Before you go pointing out other people's issues, just work on yourself, because then you can be an agent for change. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tushi, we've done emotional intelligence. I put the FB. I've realized I didn't upload it on YouTube, but there's so we've picked a topic from you, self-expression without wounding, and I'm gonna do the medical gaslighting. And I think there's something called, you know, the way you're wounded by the medical fraternity and no one, and you can't really talk about it. We are gonna do it in the future. So Sharon, thank you for the topic. Tushi, thank you for the topic. If you have a question and ukona haya, you've just inbox me privately. But Sir, I think you can wrap it up for us.
Okay. January, February, we're now going into March. March ndo ya tabia mbaya. How many me?
Thank God we are Christian. We are. It's not Sabbath. May, we are calling it Ngono May.
But March near, so that I know. I remind me March tunafanya.
March we are actually doing emotional. We chat on a topic again, eating and mental health, and the second one is on codependency, because Dr. Obuluta said we need to cover codependency. So we'll do mental health and eating and codependency. May is gonna May.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just confirming when, just beginning to prepare people well in advance. So thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Joanne, in absence, and thank you, Tony. Oh, you know, the fun fact, Tony is my classmate, former classmate, so I could call him classmate. So thank you, guys. You've added immense value, and thank you for everyone who's made it for today's call, and for anyone who'll also watch this in future. We appreciate that you've made the time. One thing I'd like to celebrate is, I know in this age and time, reels are the ones doing, you know, if we really wanted things to go, you do it in reels, which is a minute and less. But just tell me how I'd even finish defining emotional labor in a minute, you know, for a newbie, so that you guys, I'd first of all need like 5 reels to explain what emotional labor is, then another 1,000 reels to do all you guys have covered, so that you invest your time to listen, you invest your time to go in depth. I'm not fighting the culture, but I keep saying, like, hey, it took 20 years to get into the mess you are. We won't sort it in a tweet. You know, we can't tweet. We can't get it out in a tweet. The time investment put here is something I totally celebrate and put it. The other category of people I'd like to celebrate are those who write to us, following up on stuff. I totally would like to celebrate each one of you, and would like to encourage that we don't set these things up for ourselves. Paul and I could just sit and read and be fine. We do this so that we can be a blessing to many more. So please give us more topics. Give us, we want to scratch where it is truly itching. So slide into our DMs, post on the comments on topics that you'd like to address. Some people have even become bold enough to slide into the DM and propose themselves as speakers. Of course, there's going to be a vetting process, but if you feel you're good at a certain topic and you'd like to we are so open. Please just slide into the, you can be able to get in touch with any one of us. As you heard, our just what's coming around the corner. We are trying to have these sessions twice a month, just again, so that they are not overwhelming. 4 hours of content is a complete course. So in March, we're going to look at mental health and eating disorders. It's really a thing. People out here are struggling with spoon and fork, trying to compete with filters. So you don't know your friend who looks thin is filters. So we need to talk about, a full range, your relationship with food and your relationship with health begins with mental issues. So we need to talk about that. And then we need to talk about codependency and the whole idea of, the simple way for me to put it is using humans as crutches. So that's really what we're going to cover in March. Giving you a heads up, and I know why we need to do this as Africans, is the whole sexual talk has been taboo. Coming in May, the whole month of May is dedicated to talk about the issue of sex. We are lining up speakers, the beat is ready. So please get ready, your questions in advance, and also just holding your horses. If you have questions around that area, we got you covered. It's coming up. Otherwise, beyond that, reminder to subscribe and hit the follow button at all our channels. On FB, that's at Authentic Dialogues with Sarah Jackson. Our panelists will also drop in their handles so that you can check into them on LinkedIn and IG. And also, please remember, we have our YouTube page. It's called Authentic Dialogue. And I have my personal page. It's called Sarah Jackson by name. So your followership and stuff would be helpful. We don't yet have a Patreon account or an M-Pesa number, but if you DM us nicely that you want to bless us, we can be sure to tell you how to send us anything. Beyond that, again, Sharon, Tony, Joanne, Posa, thank you so much. I pray that we will, from here, all of us go and become better at expressing the emotional labor we are going through and better at supporting and being aware with others through the emotional labor, regardless of gender and regardless of station in life. God bless you.
Thank you. I will stop the live stream.